So I just wanted to very briefly highlight some relevant topics that, in our opinion, are shaping. We have an active presence in Latin America. We observe the business in Latin America, in Europe, in Africa as well. And we are seeing that some of these topics are worrying to all the companies throughout the world. Okay, what's going on? The first one is private labels and the emergence of low-cost retail. Sustainability, this is something which all the companies are worried about, and many of the governments. The demographic challenge, and I'll give you an idea why is this important. I'll give you also some highlights about the future, the new foodstuffs and alternative proteins, and whether that's going to have to do something with disruption. Okay. First thing, private labels. Okay, this is a phenomenon which is growing throughout the world. You can see in different colors, and you see the green color is Europe. This graph tells us that this private labels phenomenon is a phenomenon from European origin. Okay, these are retailers who decide to develop their own products, their own labels, instead of selling or in complement to selling also manufacturers' brands. Okay, we have in this chart, we have the United Arab Emirates. I don't know if you see it. It's way down to the end. So this is a very small phenomenon here in this country, okay? But if you go to other countries like Switzerland or United Kingdom or Spain, it's more than 50%. This is very relevant. What does it mean? It means that more than 50% of all the food products that are sold in Spain are sold under retailer brands. The relevant thing about this is that being a phenomenon of European origin, it's growing throughout the world. The second continent where it is growing very quickly is America and Latin America. And it will probably come to other parts of the world, okay? This changes very importantly the rule of the game. Imagine food manufacturing in Spain or in the United Kingdom. He notes that 50% of the market is dominated by retailer brands. What can he do in order to be successful, to sell, and to be successful with their innovations? Okay, this is complicated. Here we have a summary of the averages per continent or by big geographic area. So if you are losing positions because retailer brands with cheaper products are conquering the market, then you have to innovate, okay? And this is one of the ideas. Have you ever heard of the square watermelon? What do you think about this innovation? You know, our sessions are always very participative, so I'm always willing to bring you on board and making questions and so on. So what do you think about this innovation? Is it a good innovation? Is there any logistics guy in the room? Logistics people, oh, they love this innovation. Eh? They love it. I mean, you can imagine how does this innovation reduce logistics cost and the cost of watermelons? You know, the problem with this is that consumers don't like it because they think it's transgenic. So at the end, you have to ask yourself, what is the value that this innovation is bringing to consumers and to customers? Okay, it's not easy. So you have to innovate with consumer priorities in mind. And here you have some of them: trust, convenience, prices, this is important, ethics, environment, exclusivity, affinity, pleasure, fun, health, nutrition, well-being. Okay, this is all very nice. You have to innovate. And in mature markets, you have to innovate to generate value. But the important question is, for which of these things are consumers willing to pay more? And this is not easy to answer. Are they willing to pay more for trust? Depending on the market. If all the companies offer the same trust level, then consumers are not willing to pay more because it's not differential. Are they willing to pay more for health, nutrition, and well-being? Probably yes. Are they willing to pay more for convenience? Are they willing to pay more for ethics and sustainability? Well, we'll come back to that later. So, on top of the private labels, there is another phenomenon which is growing worldwide, which are hard discount retailers. Hard discount retailers model, they are based on 4 key pillars. The one is reduced assortment. The second is they push private labels. The third one is operating efficiency, and the fourth one is austere shops. So if you are a food manufacturer in Europe, let's say, okay, and your market is being conquered by private labels, retailers' private labels, and retailers are reducing assortment, what is the probability that you will be successful with an innovation? It's becoming very difficult in Europe. So you have to be very sharp in the way you compete, okay? The implications of this is dilution of the brand value. Markets do not pay for inefficiencies. So if you are willing to compete and you are placing, you have a high brand value and you charge high prices in the market and so on, how much of those prices are supporting your inefficiencies? You have to reduce your inefficiencies because otherwise the market, immature markets, will pull you out, like Europe, like Latin America and other markets. And because of reduction of retail shelf space and difficulty in positioning innovations. Okay, so then in this world where price competition is becoming, in many markets, is becoming very important, you have to choose how you want to compete. You have to be a leader, but you have to choose. You want to be a leader in perceived value, where you focus on consumers by creating differential and relevant value and innovating on products and concepts, or you want to be a leader in cost. Those are two generic ways to compete, but it's very difficult to be both at the same time. So if you want to be a cost leader, then you can be very profitable by manufacturing, for instance, for retailers, for retailer private labels. But then your focus of innovation is more on processes, and you have to be excellent in flexibility, efficiency, cost, and service. And here you have some examples of companies who chose to compete in this way. The important message about this is that you have to choose which is the ADN of your company, and which are your skills, and how you are going, which is the type of value you're going to bring to the market. This is the important thing, okay? Second, the sustainability wave. You probably heard very much, and the champion of this around the world is Europe. Okay, Europe launched in 2019 the Farm to Fork and the Green Strategy and the Green Deal, and they were very exigent by placing very high commitments and standards. For instance, they say by 2030, Europe has to reduce the use of pesticides by 50% in agriculture, or we have to reduce the use of antimicrobials or by 50%. And also nutrient losses, which results in a reduction of fertilizers in 20%. And 25% of the European area should be organic farming, okay? This is very exigent. By 2030, we are 5 years ahead. So, how is Europe trying to make this? One of the side effects, one of the main effects is the absolutely mad increase in hyper-regulation. So we see, for instance, this is a chart of a case I wrote last year about one of the biggest food companies in Spain, the biggest food company in Spain, which is Valcompans, and they gather in the last 5 years, there are more than 600 specific regulations for the pork sector in Europe, in Spain. If you add to that all the specific regulations that this company has to meet, which are related in general to consumer goods, to plastics, to the food sector in general, this company, they say, well, we are having an increasing burden in just opening the door every morning and making sure that we are not failing in some regulation throughout Europe. Okay, this is becoming quite complex. Now, you see, in Europe is starting to think about this, and there is a new initiative called the Omnibus Initiative, by which they think perhaps we've gone too far and we have to simplify, because otherwise we might be the most sustainable region in the world, but our food companies will disappear because they will stop being competitive throughout the world. Okay, so they are thinking about let's see how it goes. So what about consumers? Okay, we have to be sustainable. This is very important, and so on. And then there was this survey launched 3 years ago, and they surveyed 35,000 people in Europe. Okay, and they asked consumers, what do you think about sustainability? And this is very interesting, because they say, well, you see, for 6 out of 10 European consumers, sustainability is not the responsibility. It depends on the company. So it's you who have to be sustainable, not me. For 60% of consumers, business must make commercial sacrifices to put an end to racism, xenophobia, and other hate forms. It's you, companies, who have to do it, not me, consumer. It's you. Consumers are willing to punish non-sustainable brands. 42 of them stopped buying certain products due to their high environmental impact. 42%. But at the same time, 1 of every 2 consumers want to be more sustainable, but their daily priorities are more important. And at the end, for 82% of European consumers, their priority when they buy is to save money more than saving the planet. This is what consumers think when they, in the moment of truth. The moment of truth from consumers is when they go to the shop, they go to the shelf, and they pick up and they choose the product. That's the moment of truth with consumers. And in this moment, they are not willing to pay more for sustainability. So it's probably a must, something that you have to do, but don't think that consumers are willing to pay more for that. This is important to know. So the third very important thing that is happening is the demographic challenge. What's the story about? Well, these are recent news about 1 or 2 years ago. Climate envoy from the US, John Kerry, said, and he has, and this is an old story. You've probably heard that. Okay? The story says, guys, this is going to be, we are going to be 10,000 millions by 2050. And the planet will not be able to sustain this. The planet is finished, and 10,000 million people by 2050 is unsustainable. You've heard this story, right? Okay, is this true? Well, let's look at the data. First piece of data, you know, in China is already decreasing the population. In the last 3 years, population in China has decreased by 4.2 million people, which is 50% of the Swiss population, by the way. And it's 40% of the United Arab Emirates population as well. So what's happening? Will we reach 10,000 million by 2050? Okay, let's. First fact: world fertility rates are falling. Fertility rates are the average number of children per woman. Okay? If we want the world to remain flat in the population, we have to meet the world fertility rate has to be at least the replacement fertility rate, which is 2.25. It's not 2 kids per woman because there's some infant mortality and so on, but it's 2.25, okay? So what's happening in the world? Well, first thing is the United Nations, they made a projection in 2017 and say, okay, by 2100, there will be 11.200 million people in the world. And in 2022, they corrected this. 10,000 million and 10,400 million people by 2080. So less people, the peak will be smaller and it will be sooner, okay? And probably they will correct it again very soon, okay? Because what's happening? First piece of data, 66% of the world's population already live in countries with a fertility rate below 2.1. 25% of the world's population live in countries where the population is already declining. Only 4% of the world population, all in Africa, live in a country with fertility rate above 5. The percentage of population over 65 years old will increase from 10% to 20% in 2050. Those over 65 consume at least 10 or 15% less calories. Population peak will most probably happen sooner and be lower than projected by the UN. So how do we see the world map? The world map, we see it like this. Red is the countries in the world with a fertility rate below 2.1, which are starting to decline their population. And green are the countries in the world with a fertility rate above 2.1. This is mainly all Africa. Population will grow in Africa and will decline in the rest of the world. And on average, it will continue growing probably until 2040, 2050, and will peak not at 10 million people, will probably peak at 8,000, 9,000 million. And from then, it will start declining. And some of the scenarios, they say, no, the problem is we might be only 4,000 million people in the world by 2100, by the start of the 22nd century. It's important to know this. Why is all this important that I talked to you about? All this is important. First, retailers, private labels, and hard discount formats. If you want to compete worldwide, or if you are looking into the future and you think that retailers, private labels, and low-cost formats are going to develop in your country, you have to be aware that shelf space will be reduced. Shelf space is the room where you position your products. If there is less room to position your products, you are going to have difficulties in competing. You have to become more efficient, and you have to rethink your way you compete because the brand value will be diluted. Second, sustainability and hyper-regulation. First, it's not optional. You have to do it. You have to do it because otherwise you will not be able to compete. You have to fulfill with regulations. If you want to sell in Europe, you have to be sustainable. But this is not going to give you an additional value. It will give you additional cost, not additional value because consumers are not willing to pay for that. Okay, so you have to think how you do it, okay? And at the end, all this is praising an imperative for efficiency, for size, for economies of scale, to be able to compete. And then demography, why is this important? First, we are probably going to a world with an aging population, and older consumers, they have different needs and they consume less. Second, we might probably have in the world in the future difficulties in recruiting labor. Okay? Young people will be reducing. There will be long-term consequences for economic growth, migrations, pension plans. Who is going to pay the pensions in the future? For food demands. And one of the questions is if in the world all the experts, so-called experts, are saying the problem we have is population is growing, will be growing, the world is unsustainable, and the reality is the opposite, are we pursuing the right objectives? Or are we totally wrong in what we are trying to do? And finally, how do you do business in a world with a declining population? We've always lived in a world with a growing population. How will a world with a declining population be? And I think I've run out of time. You know, the problem is I normally speak longer about this, but I will then skip this part because I just ran out of time. I'm sorry. And I'll have a final comment about I have a board there saying time is up with an exclamation sign, so a final comment, okay? Some piece of data about sustainability and the food chain and so on, which can help us think, okay? First, in 1944 in the USA, there were 25.6 million milk cows, which produced 53,000 million kilograms of milk. In 2007, just before all this sustainability wave started throughout the world, there were 9.2 million milk cows in the US, which produced 84,200 million liters of milk. Now we make some very simple calculation, and we find that per kilogram of milk, relative to 1944, every kilogram of milk is produced with 21% of the animals, 23% of the feed, 35% of the water, 10% of the land, 24% of the manure, 43% of the methane, 56% of the CO2, and 37% of the carbon footprint. What does this figure tell us? Yes, sustainability is important, but the food chain in the world has always been doing that. We have always been working very keen on promoting sustainability. The difference is in the past, we called it business efficiency, not sustainability. And now we call it sustainability. Okay, it's probably the same picture.